Okay, Adam, we are good to go.
Great. All right. So welcome, everybody, for this next round of talks. My name is Adam Nocek, and I'm a professor at Arizona State University and director of the Center for Philosophical Technologies, also at ASU, and I'll be moderating this conversation. And I'm just going to say a quick word about the School for Materialist Research, which many of you who have been tuning in probably already know about, but we're basically an informal educational program that offers seminars and workshops that address materialisms running through contemporary science, philosophy, art, mathematics, design, architecture, and politics. The school is a kind of international platform founded by the Institute of Social Sciences and Humanities, Skopje, the Center for Philosophical Technologies at ASU, the Department for Architecture, Theory, and Philosophy of Technics at the Technical University in Vienna, and the Critical Inquiry Lab at Design Academy Eindhoven. I should also note that you should stay tuned for our June and July programming. That's all going to be announced very soon, so please stay tuned for that. But without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker today, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Anne-Françoise Schmid, who is a philosopher and epistemologist who works on the multiple interactions between sciences and arts, between epistemology and the multiplicity of philosophies. These dynamic relationships can only be understood and systematized by a science of terms and relationships, a modality of, as she calls it, design. Schmid sees in philosophical intervention, rather than a result of criticism, the effect of a conception of and in philosophy, which occurs when philosophy touches another discipline. The design, rather than a method external to the philosophy, allows it to manifest its construction in its links to other knowledge, doctored or indoctrinated. Philosopher among scientists, more recently philosopher among artists. An editor of Russell and Couturat. She has taught philosophy and epistemology at the University of Paris, West Nanterre, and mathematical logic at the University of Geneva. She has been teaching at the New Center of Research and Practice since 2016. Her problem is really the question of how to avoid exclusions of emerging scientific methods in science in view scientific methods in science in view of what she saw in laboratories and research centers, exclusion of philosophies in the name of the supremacy of one of them. To this end, she has manifested the hypotheses of classical epistemology and has made extensions of them to take account of the generalized interdisciplinarity of contemporary sciences. At the same time, she works on a philosophical style, not in, but with philosophies, considering their multiplicity. And with that, I would like to give the stage over to Anne-Françoise. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You hear me? It's good? Thank you. Thank you. Is there a field for philosophy? The translation of this talk is made by Jeremy Smith, who is here, and Luka Stojanovic. Thank you. This talk is in 5 parts. 1, preparing the experimentation. 2, the hypothesis of a real preceding philosophy. 3, on the contingency of philosophy and of the philosopher. 4, the point of exteriority. And 5, a final fiction. Bon. 2 exergues from La Ruelle. The universe was in the world, but the world did not see it. It is in the poem on the Black universe within the human foundations of colors. And another, there is no philosophy of the future, but a future philosophy. In talk, in the book, The Philosophers and the Future, in honor for Gilbert Ottois. Introduction. The question of a field for philosophy seems almost obvious. Indeed, we know multiple fields, and in particular, the disciplines where philosophy is exercised could be its fields. But this is not what we seek to answer the question, is there a field for philosophy? What concerns us is the investigation of a field entirely exterior or foreign to philosophy. A field where it would have no authority, but where it nevertheless will be necessary for the development of new forms of invention, and a field that it would ignore under its classical and authoritarian forms. This investigation is in fact very difficult, and I will add very risky. We will see that it unsettles philosophy both in its unity and its multiplicity. On the other hand, modeled after the work I wrote with Muriel Mambrini-Doudet, Generic Epistemology, Manual for Future Science. It is a book, Paris-Timet, yes. The investigation proposes a more collective and more interdisciplinary practice of philosophy. We will substitute the solitary philosopher with the ordinary philosopher, who follows the order between the real and philosophy and seeks out the original content of their practice. The ordinary philosopher is not an individual as common sense perceives them, but an extended and collective individual. In its sufficient autonomy, we will come to seek a field for philosophy which not only puts it in relation with other practice, but brings it into contact with the concrete that resists the philosophizing appetite. The philosopher will take part in an experience which puts them in relation with philosophy and gives philosophy new liberties and style of writing. The first epigraph, the universe was in the world, but the world did not see it, manifests a change of scale. The universe within the world, and the invisibility of this change in scale. In the world of philosophy, can we open something that philosophy itself does not recognize? This epigraph will be a focal point at each step in the development of this investigation for field for philosophy. The second epigraph, there is no philosophy of the future, suggests an inversion between philosophy and what is occupies itself with another focal point. By combining both epigraphs, perhaps we can glimpse into another field. This is the business of experimentation. The point is to implement an experimental apparatus proposed by the two epigraphs susceptible to create or conceive a look at philosophy which will allow new possibilities of invention and writing for it, not its fixation. What are the elements of this apparatus? And how do we prepare them to make them perform together? 1. Preparing the experimentation. Several factors are required to prepare for our experimentation. They are as follows. Philosophy as an object of experience, an integrative object where synthesis is no longer assured. The transformation of principles into hypotheses, to philosophize from hypotheses. The philosopher as the experimenter, experimenting on the limits of philosophy. A generic space for philosophies where they common equal X can be introduced. This common equal X can be new combinations. The world and the simulation of worlds. Philosophies inhabit the world all by simulating other worlds. The world is not enough. Ultimately, a vertical dimension will allow us to presume an universe whose world does not have the means to be perceived. This dimension has often taken the form of the linea serpentinata in the work of François Laruelle. This figure comes to us from Michelangelo and Ravesson. One aspect of verticality that gathers the two epigraphs, the change of scale and inversion, is the following. There is an ethics for philosophy, but not a philosophy of ethics. However, this universe does not belong to only one philosopher. The philosopher knows how to construct worlds, but it is in this gesture that the philosopher touches upon something that they cannot see while remaining a philosopher. This is one of the hypotheses of non-philosophy. The philosopher must become human and recognize their humanity without qualities to be able to perceive their gesture and objectivate it. But to do this, the philosopher needs help from another discipline. The auto-modeling of philosophy fails here. There is no theory of philosophy without the help of another disciplines and of another practice. Our experimentation will engage as much the difference in scale as the inversion of the word "of" into an operator which contributes towards unbinding the philosopher from philosophical authority and philosophical sufficiency. Inverting "of" makes us see the philosopher's act. There are two personages in this experimentation, philosophy and the philosopher. They are not alike. The I of the philosopher is introduced to the experience of contingency within the multiplicity of philosophies. This experience and experiment are fundamental for the investigation into a field independent of philosophy, but where philosophy, now transformed and treated, can take its place. What about the negation that intervenes in both epigraphs? Negation in non-philosophy is to put at a distance, whereas negation in non-standard philosophy is an extension of the field. We can compare this use of negation with the notion of non-music. In music, negation adjoins its timbre and noise. confer Brazilian composer included Jean-Pierre Caron, who is inspired by Giacinto Scelsi. Extension as a non-classical negation allows one to articulate logics that are often seen as contradictory. For example, Russell's principle of external relations and the use of relations in Deleuze. These epigraphs have the function to deprive philosophy of its sufficiency, to limit philosophy, but by leaving it with a greater freedom of invention, a greater freedom that what sufficiency constantly use and abuse, critique. With the help of intermediary axioms, namely the obscure cogito and the open secret, we will bind invention to the exercise of the de jure multiplicity of philosophies. The Kampfplatz of Kant and fields within philosophy that depend on it. Philosophers have spoken of matter in philosophy, such as Husserl in his logical investigations. There, matter allows one to better distinguish the scope and the contents within complex intentional acts by making the part of what is lived intentional. Further, it allows one to distinguish the object of a description, which is what of this lived experience is expressed. However, this matter is within philosophy, even if it is but one material condition of possibility. Philosophy requires a degree of matter, but philosophy does everything to ensure that it does not go beyond its sphere of influence. The idea of a sphere for philosophy, distinct from the famous Kantian Kampfplatz, which would be a space proper to philosophy, has no special significance in the philosophical gist. The field of philosophy is within philosophy itself. The field is held between two edges, two contraries, as is custom in philosophy, the a priori and the empirical. From the point of view of the a priori, the philosophers who see some other disciplines as their own field, or those who, like Wittgenstein, think it would be nonsense to attribute a field to philosophy if it is not language. According to Wittgenstein, the logos is but one outgrowth devoid of meaning. As for the empirical, determined by the a priori of philosophies, it is one sort of internal field whose limits are drawn in advance by principles and concepts. The empirical objects of each philosophy do not completely overlap. There is a nearly infinite possibility of development of the empirical, giving to the empirical a certain mystery. What is its theoretical place if it is not to distinguish philosophy otherwise than through principles? Philosophy had the ability to distribute fields to other disciplines as one of its functions. But disciplines are often rebellious and seek out their own autonomy. Anthropology or ethnology no longer wanted to be guided by philosophy. Sometimes we want to forge new bonds with philosophy, but without submitting these bonds to its hierarchies. We can suppose that to forge these new bonds assumes the creation of new fields for philosophy, in the sense where the field will no longer be the point of application of philosophy. The field will be a semi-rebel that proposes a part of the unknown to philosophy, and not only a part of classical astonishment. To realize this change, we will see that we must comprehend the principles of philosophy like hypotheses, and begin to philosophize from and with hypotheses. We know that Leibniz and Russell knew to give importance to hypotheses within philosophy, while it was customarily relegated to the sciences. Let us begin with a variation of the first epigraph. The field is within philosophy, but philosophy did not notice it. There is a mode of exteriority to philosophy, which is within philosophy, without which philosophy does not notice, and which, despite everything, could not do without. Without this mode of exteriority, philosophy would not be philosophy. How do we demonstrate this? And how can such an assertion change the practice of philosophy? Can we imagine a field that does not depend on philosophy from philosophy? There are some fields that philosophy delegates, but the very gesture of delegation subsists. I propose a series of propositions to make a place for an exteriority outside of the philosophical field. In a certain way, it is to add intermediary axiom to non-philosophy and non-standard philosophy. These axioms are necessary because non-philosophy is interested in philosophy as an unity more than a diversity. Concerning one preposition. First, let's reprise some philosophical habits. Its relation to other disciplines nearly each time makes use the word of, in French, de, such as in philosophy of sciences, philosophy of art, philosophy of religion, philosophy of techniques. It is in this position that philosophy nearly always appears in the singular, the philosophy of science. There are science in the plural, but one philosophy of science or one philosophy of sciences. There is a trajectory already made for philosophy. It chooses historical cases and texts that it projects some of its characteristic properties, such as opposition or complementarity among the conceptual and the experimental. In philosophy of art, it creates commentaries which project a philosophical signification over painting, sculpture, installation, and even music. It knows how to transform techniques which respond each time to finite problems into an infinite technology which ends by being represented as autonomous. Obviously, all these traits are caricatures because these operations are made with technical means and subtle, varied stylistics which make up the bonds between philosophies. Within these technical means, there is a beginning of formalization that some will bring to the side from mathematics or physics, rarely from chemistry, biology, or the human sciences. The use of the word of manifests the voracity of philosophy. If philosophy is found with another discipline, then it seeks to interiorize some trait from it, perhaps even those which most often allow to put it in relation with other further disciplines, for example, through mathematization or even now digitization. There exists an inverse use of the word of. The science of philosophy, the techniques of philosophy, has another signification or another use. It is philosophy as science, philosophy in its technical aspect. It is then philosophy that is characterized rather than its voracious relation with other disciplines. They are what we can call its disguises. In whatever way we turn, it is very difficult to speak of philosophy without making any allusion to other disciplines. Its autonomy is paradoxically guaranteed by its relation to other disciplines. I draw the following idea in my research. Philosophies, among themselves, have relations which are indirectly bound to the relations that they give to other disciplines, in particular the sciences. From the word of to the concept of operator. We replace the word of through an inversion. There is no philosophy of future, but rather a future philosophy, as Laruelle proposed it in a colloquium. The inversion of the of leads to the invention of operator on philosophy. Any discipline can be an operator on philosophy. Science philosophy will manifest the interventions of philosophy in the fragments of science so heterogeneously that the connections and adjustments cannot depend on the disciplines concerned. Art philosophy demonstrates the inchoative series and the dynamic movements process consumption and inscription within philosophy. 2. The hypothesis of a real preceding philosophy. The hypothesis that I propose is that the autonomy of philosophy only makes sense if we consider at the same time and identically the philosophies which make up its tradition, and I posit the primacy of the de jure multiplicity of philosophy over philosophy. Is this multiplicity just the material of philosophy or philosophies? A philosophy which would be in total isolation could not be recognized as philosophy, perhaps as intention, process, and inscription rather than philosophy. But this multiplicity is equivocal. It allows us to treat the relation of philosophies to the real in the form of compatibilities, which themselves are part of this multiplicity. Being isolated, when philosophy makes a representation of the real, created through its one arrangements and techniques, without being able to be recognized as philosophy. This philosophical horizon allows any philosophy to preserve a kind of authority, to think that the more one advances in their philosophical thought, the more they have chance to encounter the real. The authentic real is at the end of philosophy and not vice versa. It is what grounds the authority of and the sufficiency of philosophy. The de jure multiplicity manifests the desire of sufficiency of each untreated multiplicity, not in a chronological succession of type. For example, a caricatural response where my philosophy is better than the previous one, but in a systematics which can support diverse interpretations of time and chronology. Each philosophy thus manifests an active indifference to the other philosophies, to take up an expression from Laruelle's early Nietzschean writings. Non-philosophy has changed this problematic radically with the following hypothesis. The real precedes philosophy and is indifferent to it. There is something real which cannot be philosophied. There is philosophy which can develop as it desires and consume itself, like the desiring machine in Deleuze, or philosophy is a skin disease, as Laruelle said in the vomit scene. In his thesis, General Economy of the Effects of Being, to be published in Temple University, Tokyo by Jordanko Sekulovsky, Laruelle undoes the identities of phenomenology in a system, such as intention, process, inscription on a topos, all of which already bring out something of the dynamics of his subsequent works. It was necessary to separate phenomenology from its identities to find the one or the real. And each philosophical and or non-philosophical wave will be in a constant motion, each work being something of a freeze frame of a moment in this dynamic. There is a form of materiality of philosophy that philosophy cannot notice. If philosophy does not co-construct the real, it becomes contingent. Does this contingency lead to a critique of philosophy? This is not the right term. Contingency softens the Kampfplatz and the misunderstandings between contemporary philosophers. It gives philosophy new liberties. It admits a de jure multiplicity of philosophies as a condition for philosophical writing. How do we write? Without considering the fact that other philosophers write under other hypotheses and anchor themselves to other disciplines or practice, there emerges a first materiality that philosophy, in its classical systematicity, cannot recognize. A philosophy without foundations. A philosophy which is written by considering the de jure multiplicity of philosophies loses its own foundations. These foundations are replaced by the relations that it builds with other disciplines, as the work of Joëven Neo has shown. I have translated this into two intermediate axioms. The obscure cogito, there is at least one philosophy that I do not understand. Multiplicity does not give itself. Two, the open secret. Philosophies do not hide themselves, and yet they are not manifest. These intermediate axioms question the overlap between philosophy and philosophies. The cogito is out in the open, but the open does not notice it. Three, on the contingency of philosophy and of the philosopher. An experience of philosophy is then lived that is contingency liberates. In a practice without foundations, the philosopher herself appears contingent, but her experience eclipses the object, philosophy, for a moment, or in a case, eclipses it as isolated and autoproductive. That philosophy would be without foundation can give rise to several conceptions of its possible field. For example, think of the philosopher Robert Froedman, North Texas University. who sent his students to the field directly in a social group and would give a very interdisciplinary philosophical teaching at the same time. Or think of William Gonzalez in Cali, in Colombia, Universidad del Valle, who sent his doctoral students into the country towns to start up master's programs in philosophy, almost everywhere in the hopes to be a pledge for peace in a country coming out of war. The research of intermedia, but one can also see philosophy as a function that the philosopher bears. Thus, to be a philosopher among the scientists, philosophers among the artists, etc. Think of the philosopher Fernando Zalamea, à Bogota, who admirably read Poincaré and currently works on a publication by Grothendieck, all while writing on Proust. Is it the same gesture as Hegel's? I do not believe so. This does not concern the Aufhebung, but rather the research of intermediaries and intermediary fields which no longer directly depend on philosophy. According to Fernando Zalamea, we can no longer practice contemporary mathematics by making them exclusively repose on set theory, however complex and difficult it may be. To comprehend contemporary mathematics, we must create series of an intermediary scope to take account of the current wealth of mathematics. The same terms, theories of the intermediary rank, has also been utilized by the philosopher Jean Gallien to manifest the diversity of the disciplines of biology. Biology begins one spectrum of heterogeneous theories. All these works change the idea of unity and its dream, which have been directors within the epistemology of physics. There is heterogeneity within the sciences, and the science can perceive it if they get rid of the dream of unity, like the epistemology of physics has done, relying on the reduction of heterogeneity that is functional use of mathematics allows. They then must invent a new epistemology to take account of these heterogeneities and recognize them as sciences. No former paradigm suffice here in the wealth of current work. The works of epistemology all repose on past examples. To project these examples, even recent ones, into works that come about are not enough to make them visible. In this way, it is what I, side by side with Muriel Mambrini-Doudet, worked on together in our work Generic Epistemology, to give the tools to comprehend what is happening in the sciences. Muriel was then the president of a great center of interdisciplinary research, and I was a part of the governance of this center. We hesitated to call our book Intermediary Fields. Also, in the arts, the philosopher's place will no longer be to comment, but to eventually write text to accompany and allow, along with the artists, to think the bonds between art and philosophy, which could be common, perhaps ephemeral, in a new way. It is what we have done in different ways with Ivan Liovik Ebel, Alice Lucy Rekab, and in another way through an exhibition in Hanover with Gallien Déjean. Therefore, the philosopher's role is no longer grounded in their work. Their experience in the research of intermediaries opens to new styles. There is a fusion of styles and techniques, with style becoming an intermediary for the technique and inversely to a near displacement. Philosophy without foundation flees away like fictions or experimental texts where neither totality nor the result are given. It is in this experience and experiment that the philosopher makes use of hypotheses more than principles. The correlations among intermediaries results from hypotheses that are more local than the principles which remain impermeable to the experience of the philosopher. 4. The point of exteriority. With the intermediaries, it is now possible to pose a point of exteriority independent of philosophy and to ask ourselves what of philosophy manifests from this point of exteriority. At once an unity, philosophy, and a multiplicity, philosophies, and the same time separately and identically. Let us think of Vladimir Vernadsky when he imagines himself looking at the earth from afar. He sees first a mineral, then a place of animals which modifies the vegetal world, and human thought modifying the animal world. He concludes that human thought is found in the earth's crust. Despite the different scales, we still have the earth. So thought was in the earth, and the earth was not aware of it. The point of exteriority was there. Vernadsky, the geologist who could not be separated from Stalin because he knew all on the crust of all the Russian. And in the time when Stalin disappeared, Florensky, Schmid, and other Russian philosophers. And Vernadsky tried to organize interdisciplinary platform in Europe. Would the philosopher be then the point of exteriority, which would make philosophy manifest itself at once as singular and multiple? They would be like the one who inhabits the world while simulating others. The philosopher never delivers only one philosophy, but rather simulates others at the same time. The philosopher thus has a responsibility before philosophy to respond to philosophies in an unstable and each time singular equilibrium. Genericity and the common equal X. In front of the identity and the multiplicity of philosophies, we can suppose a genericity, a place, which is a common equal X, always guarding a part of the unknown. It's not given. It is to be constituted as an unknown, and not as a simply uncertainty which leaves the concept unchanged. Let's suppose that this unknown is an X, that there are alternatives and knowledge that allow one to determine it, at least partially. But what knowledges? It's possible to use very heterogeneous ones because it is possible to echo them through the intermediaries. These allow a reorganization of knowledge. How can these commons be developed? It's possible to do it by matrices as Laruelle suggested in non-standard philosophy, with, on the coordinate, the condition of experiences, and in the other, the characteristics of philosophy. The spaces of the matrix are places of invention for philosophy, and it is a method which allows us to work in commons, even with heterogeneous or contradictory hypotheses, if we consider the variety of use of nodes. Decomposition of the logos and invention in philosophy. To decompose philosophy, the question is neither to destroy philosophy, nor the real world of the field, but to undo the entanglements. Both will have new dimensions, liberated by the bracketing of complementarity and the opposition of the two notions. There is the concept, and there is the empirical. Let's not make them opposites. This obliges us to consider the contingency of our concepts and our field. Let us look for a philosophy that does not see present daily life in necessary darkness, but rather that is attentive to the lights and the shadows of contemporary objects. Let us look for a philosophy that is not supposed to be the creator of these objects, a one that is not persuaded that it must be accounted for them. Let us present philosophy without its opposite, without its sufficiency. Let us present the field without its out-opposition, but by seeking the tools to recognize it as such. For these tasks, it is necessary to be able to recognize the limits to philosophy, but not from above. It can go up as far as it wishes with the help of other disciplines, according to Laruelle, such as the generic, the quantum, and philosophy, by stages where a philosophical thought and scientific and philosophical thought are linked. This is already a limit of omnipotence, but there is another. This time from below. There are not inhabitants of the earth rather than the world that have been internalized by philosophy as abstract things, beings. Katerina Kolosova has shown this beautifully. The animal, man, woman, pain, and sorrow are not abstractions that philosophy presents to us. We are no longer in the era of all philosophy as we speak of the all-powerful, but in an era where philosophy takes its place and its field just where it stumbles towards the concrete, not a particular concrete in a worldly situation, but a rough concrete that makes us feel something of the human that philosophy, having forgotten it, has not been able to transmit to us. The animal, the man, and the woman see philosophy, which, on the contrary, does not see them. The living was in the philosophy, but philosophy did not consider it in its concreteness. Rather than a philosophy of the living, let's practice philosophy in another style, that of the fiction, passing from the real to another point of the real, or that of the experimental text, of which, in a certain way, this essay is a part. Let's imagine operative fictions, such a man philosophy, a woman philosophy, an animal philosophy, which makes relieve the intentions, processes, inscription, and topoi close to living matter without qualities. What would then be the field for philosophy? 1. Rare and robust, where it could find its limits of omnipotence through something concrete, or through a ject according to Laruelle, a ject without jection or without object, resisting all abstraction. The concrete was not in philosophy, and philosophy did not realize it. This is its limit and its strength. The force on invention in philosophy does not come from criticism, but from its transformation by the concrete, which returns to it the reality of the de jure multiplicity of philosophy, to philosophize by hypotheses rather than by principles. The bonds between hypotheses to philosophize from hypotheses in multiplicities, unknown and uncertainty, fiction and the experimental text. What is a fiction? A fiction touches the real in one point to pass on to another point. Its most simple formula is the following, as in École des Mines de Paris: concept cross knowledge and another knowledge, where C stands for concept and K for knowledge. A particular X cross a part of knowledge and another knowledge. Formula from generic epistemology, who was ameliorated by Bryn McNabb as CX cross part of knowledge and other knowledge. The concept of fiction then functions in an analogous way to what Laruelle calls, in philosophy and non-philosophy, a first term. While engaged within knowledge and other knowledge, a first term engages the philosophy within fiction. Fiction is a combination of a concept with knowledge under heterogeneous knowledge. Rather than working with the uncertain, fiction works with the unknown equal X, which reorganizes knowledge in an unexpected way within its realization. In philosophy, it's possible to choose a concept and recombine it with other philosophies under the guarantee of another discipline as an underdetermination. What is an experimental text? An experimental text touches the concrete. The formula is the following: knowledge and other knowledge implies hypothesis. An experimental text is a text that seeks to produce new hypotheses through heterogeneous knowledge to comprehend contemporary, integrative, and complex objects. To appear in script philosophique, The Silence of the Future, edited by Jorganko Sekulovsky in June, this June. The experimental text works on uncertainty rather than the unknown, and as Wittgenstein reminds us, uncertainty extends to the roots. The bond of fiction and experimental text, non-synthesis. In this new practice, which admits a field that does not depend on philosophy, philosophy becomes an integrative object, an object without definitive synthesis, within an unstable equilibrium between fiction and the experimental text. New work on contemporary objects then can be done, superseding complexity. Such contemporary objects are the following: climate change, nanotechnologies, GMOs, which are equally, partially unknowns. And the work can practice an orchestration where all these disciplines have the same weight, with this work included. Therefore, it's no longer the organizing of this orchestration alone, but it makes a part of this orchestration as the possibility of the creation of bonds between positions and other disciplines. This allows the generic to organize an hyper-compatibility between disciplines, but this does not make the whole of philosophy nor the whole of science. In this generic space, philosophy encounters the real otherwise, where the colors and the sounds can be reintroduced in philosophy. Philosophy then can construct spaces for its relations to other disciplines, discrete space, open space, where the fragments of disciplines act as variables and not as differences in tension. We transform differences in variables. It is this generic space that the philosopher comes into play. For the philosopher, philosophy becomes a material where she can choose a freely combined concept in accordance with the space created in relation with other practice and disciplines. Concretizations in progress. With Muriel Mambrini-Doudet, we create the Laboratory of Discrete Philosophy. It is a platform which has a structure as in generic epistemology, when the philosopher can pose a text if they accept this hypothesis. With Liovik Ebel, Topographie discrète, scénario pour un texte sans dimension, sera publié à Neuchâtel-Le Griffon en septembre 2021. Then, with the music by Thomas Koehner and video by Benoît Maire in discussion. And with Alice Lucy Rekab, Art and Philosophy, New Solidarities, in a work would be published in September, edited by Stephen Shakespeare. One of the resistance was the latest course at the New Center of Research and Practice, inventing the non-given common equal X between philosophy, art, and science, with Tony Yannick from Buffalo and Joëven Neo. I will end this experimental essay with the final fiction of this course with Tony and Joëven. It reprises the interventions of the participants in its one way, all whose disciplinary domains were very varied. The title, Discoherence of Disciplines and New Dimension for a Common Equal X. Translation by Joëven Neo. The long notes have the obligation to receive and take care of the short ones, which gives the rhythm. Among those who invented long notes, we can play Bruckner, Wagner, Jacinto Chelsea. Among the short one, we have percussion, anything that sounds from tactile pressure. Perhaps we could feel music by the difference in air pressure, what is called noise. Any piece could be immersed in the noise. If we were Leibnizians, we could accept silence as an infinitesimal form of noise. We would then touch something like a common equalix, the inchoate beginning of music, but not only of it, because in this way we break the accepted frameworks which make disciplines into separate islands while assuming that we can move from to each other directly. They remain separate, but allow echoing through silence and noise, and the generic makes them drift on the horizon without losing anything. In science, disciplines are talkative. But what about the silence of science in an interdisciplinary regime? We can accept that any woman in the most distant countries, a whole distant world, said Dutilleux, who watches her plant grow, does so with a scientific gaze. It has an intuition, an intention, an elementary, an ordinary, natural, a trajectory, and mobile truth. All the primitives of science, those that we find in the most complex and the most contemporary, even in the experimental holes under the Earth's surface. The theory-centered conception of classical epistemology cannot quite understand this. Primitives are like long notes in music. This music decolonizes science and makes it appear independent of mathematization. This does not despair, but loses its function of universal language for a more generic and modeling function. The colors are not talkative. They vary between the cry and the silence, and touch us like pressure difference, if not air, at least intermediate space between the eye and what makes art, the painting, the gallery, the volcano, and all the landscape of visageity. They can drip into our subjectivity. Closer to earth, clay, a sculptor which escapes classical standards. It extends into installations and context, but also contemporary standard by taking up the object orientation, just like an object light in context, where the gestures of the observer to approach him are part of his characterization or of his aura. The words of poetry also take on color. We perceive them as sounds and images and teleported into an universe of new dimensions. Philosophies learn to see each other and to recognize their multiplicity, a multiplicity of rights, but also of functions with other disciplines. Let us remember the Poincaré conjecture. If we can, on sphere, see in 2 dimensions, consider a point as the reduction of a closed figure which could pass through several regions of this sphere. Suppose this sphere is 3-dimensional. We can make the same conjectures in philosophy. In mathematics, this was demonstrated by Gregory Perelman, Russian mathematician, who refused the Field Prize and medal and just balanced his demonstrations on the net and not in a recognized journal. What would become of the multiplicity of philosophy in such a 3rd dimension? Philosophy would at least be deprived of its foundations. It would take the collective experience of philosophers with the help of musicians, painters, poets, physicists, if we recognize that philosophy forms a body. We will be helped by Joeven Neo and Tony Yannick. The geographer would help us keep the peace, limit hegemonies, invent new maps without hurting the territories too much. It could ally itself with geopoliticians who seeks to guarantee food and soil for humans who have become subjects of the art and philosophies as well as the sciences. Fred Moten and Edouard Glissant would inspire us for the decolonization of our prejudice on all disciplines. What would be left then? If we are lucky, a common equal X, regenerated by the impossibility of representing it in 2 dimensions, and the games synced by Tony, Yannick and Eswaran Submaranian in CMU, and the abduction, which will give us the means to reorganize our space of thought, our modes, home, and living. And for that, let's reverse the perspectographs of the classic perspectivists. Let's invent new solidarities, which are no longer just matter of perspective, but of faith without an object, of mythicism equal X. Let us be attentive to the idea of metamorphosis, confer Michael Levinas and Valère Novarina, even that of requiem and silent colors. Thanks to everyone involved in this thought project. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that amazing talk, Anne-Françoise. We have plenty of time for conversation and questions and so forth. And the way this is going to go is Katerina has generously offered to help translate your questions from English into French. And if you have a question, please do put it in the chat. Or just raise your hand in the chat.
I mean, in case it's necessary, that's what we agreed on. Anne, n'est-ce pas, si tu as besoin d'une traduction, je vais traduire. Si pas, si tu peux répondre toi-même, tu n'as pas besoin de moi, n'est-ce pas?
D'accord.
Ça ira comme ça, ok, d'accord.
On fait comme ça. Mais j'aurai sûrement besoin de traduction.
D'accord, d'accord, je suis là.
Merci, merci Katrina.
So, Adam, did we receive the questions in a written form in the chat area, or people raise hands, or?
Either way is fine. If you have a question, you can say that you have a question and I'll call on you, or you can just raise your hand. We could do it that way as well. So either way.
Oh, I thought they should write down the questions.
Oh, if you'd like to.
You know, that would help for the translation, actually. But
Yes.
Yes.
No, but no, feel free to talk. Feel free to talk. I'm joking. I'll manage. I'll manage.
You know, my problem is that I love all philosophies.
We know.
So
okay. Davor has raised his hand, Adam, unless you want to go first.
No, that's fine. Davor.
Okay, hello, thank you for the talk. Just a small question, maybe very trivial. Let's say like this, the use of philosophy in interdisciplinary settings. Does it come from philosophy or from the problems when these settings come together?
I think the two. Mm-hmm. We are in a situation now where the problems are no more only complex, but integratives. If we seek the interdisciplinary object of science, for example, obesity, For obesity, it is a lot of sciences heterogeneity. There is microbiota, intestinal microbiota of human, very important, with a signature for obesity, statistical method. There is nutrition, there is demographic development, there are poverty, there are a lot of disciplines will be important for the comprehension of obesity, which is now the cart of population of the world. And it is a situation where the synthesis is not possible. I knew one laboratory where they work on this, on human intestinal microbiota. And I discussed with person from Sanofi. We have a signature for the obesity, but it is impossible to construct a medicament of probiotics, because it would be good for 10 or 20 persons only. It's very difficult. We cannot, we have to construct another epistemologic boussole where the epistemology does not be directly pertinent to the sciences, because if we consider the epistemology as had the science as object directly, we have paradigms, and these paradigms are projected on the current sciences. And we did not see the new problems, the new productions. So it's the same for the climate. We have a lot of models. These models are laying on hypotheses who are sometimes contradictory, and we have not criteria to supreme one model contra one other. So we have to construct a sort of boussole who permit to have some orientation. It is very difficult. With Muriel Mambrini-Doudet, we have a project of the National Research Agency of France on GMOs and on fish GMOs. And we does not define the GMO fish as a fish plus a manipulation, but as an X whose characteristics are distributed in all the disciplines concerned. So it was as an X. And I saw that this logic was used in 3 different fields of thought: in non-standard philosophy, in technology, at École des Mines, the seeker theory. If we ask of a rubber, new rubber, what is a very complex, technical, with a lot of different composites. They did not add a new property on a given rubber, but they treat rubber as an X without the important properties as have the properties of the caoutchouc, perhaps. And so they are guided to use knowledge never used to construct the rubber. So the relationship between disciplinary is very different. Oh, your question, d'abord, in this situation, the situation gives a new place for philosophy, and the philosophy can adjust heterogeneous fragments of science who cannot have an echo beyond them. The two are possible.
Okay, can I just follow up with one question on this? You said we have to, no, how should I say, you talked about the dream of unity, right, earlier?
Yes.
Do you think we are going then back to unity? Because as you describe it now, philosophy is some sort of correcting measure for the X's that the other disciplines don't see, right? And through this meta perspective of philosophy, so to speak, you open up the boundaries, but you make them more practical, more potential, so to speak. You know, you give them more potency, the discipline, so to speak. And in other words, you're making the world more unified and not less unified.
Yes. Yes.
So in other words, we are going back to the dream of unity, no?
Mm-hmm. The dream of unity in physics was very important to the development of classical epistemology. But with now, this type of unity is no more very helping. Even in physics, there are some very heterogeneous manner of reasoning. Even is only quantic. I was a lot of mail in the CERN, dans le trou d'expérimentation. J'étais bien des fois. Hein? Mm-hmm. The physicist said to me, we do not understand the papers of the theorists of quantum. It's very difficult. We read the abstract and we adapt variables on the abstract. And after, we ask to the theorists if this result is compatible with the theory they have constructed. The experimentalist does not understand theory. It's a great gap between them. So quantum is special because quantum is only mathematics and not alternation of mathematics and natural language. But because of this, physicists have to invent new language in natural, new concept in natural language to accompany the mathematics. Is very interesting. So they give us some fundamental concepts. Mais je n'ai pas répondu complètement à la question, Katrina, parce que je n'ai pas tout compris encore.
Peut-être il peut répéter la question. D'abord, what did you ask if she's worried if she covered your question or?
Yeah, kind of. Maybe there is no answer to this question because
okay.
yeah, well, I mean, if you improve the understanding of each other, like theorists and practical physicists, for example, yeah, you have the theorists on the
In
one side.
quantum, yes,
Yeah.
in quantum.
Does it not? My question is only: is this leading back to how should I say? Everything became very unstable. Everything is in a move, so to speak, and we have
Yes.
different fields that are falling.
Yes, yes. If we
apart,
dream of unity of physics, we think that chemistry, biology, human science is not very scientific.
Maybe we can add one more thing about your own epistemology, Anne. Ton propre travail sur l'épistémologie non standard. What, according to Anne and my reading of Anne's work, you know, the force of unification is not a discipline, any discipline, but the object of study. So that is what dictates the mobilization of different disciplines into a certain unification. Est-ce que j'ai bien compris?
Oui, but unification is local and ephemeral.
Ah, oui.
It is the question of
underdetermination.
Underdetermination. Yes.
So I just want to make sure we have time for Amanda has a question, and then also Jeremy has a question as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks so much for your talk, and I'm sorry this is in English.
Yes.
Thank you. I was really wondering if you could speak a little bit more, and I know you've written about this and talked before about it, but I was interested in how the distinction between philosophy as standard and then non-standard philosophy broke out when we start to introduce the problem of capital. For instance, we could say that over the past century, research at the level of the university under the rubric of capital is demanded that we become interdisciplinary. It's the key ideological kind of framework of a lot of humanities research, being compelled to work with the sciences. And I think that this has produced a lot of terrible kitsch and trivial forms of research, where one discipline, has a very thin relationship to the other, and they produce really problematic and weak illustrations of each other. What you're reminding me of, I think, in your talk is the way Althusser would precisely critique this liberal capitalist understanding of the interdisciplinary space. And instead, I'm sure you're very aware of this in Spontaneous Philosophy of the Scientists. He complains about this and talks about what is it to work on a project together. And I guess what I'm wondering about is how you can make the careful distinction between interdisciplinarity in non-standard thinking and the interdisciplinarity in capital. And precisely when, say, Althusser, right, gives the role of philosophy a very important role in this, because philosophy has to be vigilant. It does some work in policing other disciplines. But in your work, philosophy does not have that role, it seems. So for me, I'm wondering, where does the kind of policing or other border take place that makes the difference between these forms of interdisciplinarity? I hope that I have got many more complex things to say, but I'm trying to be simple in my question. Thanks.
Est-ce que tu peux me résumer, Catherine? Je
Oui.
Oui.
La question d'Amande touche le côté politique des idées de l'interdisciplinarité en tant que telle. Elle nous rappelle au fait qu'aux années 90, l'interdisciplinarité a été promue par le capitalisme global, le néolibéralisme. C'est devenu une valeur que le capitalisme et la production économique capitaliste a voulu promouvoir à travers les universités. Alors, on a cette forme de l'interdisciplinarité d'un côté, et de l'autre côté, celle-ci que tu viens de présenter. Et quelle est la différence? Comment la tienne n'a pas une définition politique, disons, de ce type-là, que Amanda problématise au début.
Yes, very, very interesting. Thank you very much. Yes, interdisciplinarity was mot d'ordre dans la recherche.
It was, yeah.
Mot d'ordre. Comment est-ce qu'on dit?
Yeah, the word of the order, like the order words. The
Yes.
order, actually, the order.
Yes.
Of the time.
Yeah. And paradoxically, the institutions were too very disciplinary. And this tension was politically very, very, très dur, était très dur. I think if interdisciplinary is in order, we cannot very good work together. We can on an objective, particular objective. We can, if we construct arms, we can reasoning on a cylinder and a sphere, and connect with informatists who have not the idea that these are the arms. So the political is excluded in the engineering. So, but now there are disciplines, they are interdisciplinary, on interdisciplinary front. So we have to think in the interdisciplinary differently. Interdiscipline is not very good, I think. So I transform this idea of interdisciplinary into a generic thinking. Alors, in this generic thinking, when we use a lot of disciplines on a problem, it is important to evit ideologies, to give the same weight to all the disciplines. Biological, molecular biological has the same weight as epistemology or ethics or chemistry, etc. And all the disciplines develop a state of non-art, because they cannot understand directly the talk of the other scientists of other domains. So we construct our state of non-art. And so we can, with iteration from one discipline to another, to reconstruct this the state of non-art, to have some other relationship with other scientists. The consequence is very interesting. When a French biologist and engineer, Philippe de Réfille, he would describe the growth of trees. In Kant's Critique of Judgment, Kant said it were not Newton of brin d'herbe. Pour le brin d'herbe, je ne sais pas comment on traduit ça. Et Philippe de Réfille a su répondre à Kant. Comment est-ce qu'il a fait? How is his method? He has a lot of different scientists of different disciplines. And he said them not to describe trees, no, but to make as they would make, but with a condition, a mathematical condition, that the bourgeons are des automates, que les bourgeons sont des automates. Je ne sais pas si, oui, Katerina, que les bourgeons sont des automates. C'est-à-dire
excuse-moi, je n'ai pas entendu, je lisais les autres questions. T'as dit quoi?
Oui, alors je dis que Philippe de Réfille, pour la description de la croissance des arbres, a réuni une quantité de spécialistes et leur a dit: vous n'avez pas à vous occuper des arbres, c'est pas votre objet. Vous faites ce que vous voulez, mais à une condition mathématique. C'est que ce que vous dites soit compatible avec une proposition mathématique, strictement mathématique selon lui, c'est que les bourgeons sont des automates, c'est-à-dire qu'ils peuvent être décrits par des équations récursives.
Ok.
Voilà. Alors, juste une condition. Il ne dit pas allez directement vers l'arbre. Non, vous faites ce que vous voulez. Et il a réussi, après coup, avec des mathématiciens, pour trouver des régularités entre les disciplines, puis ensuite avec l'informatique, et retour vers les maths et vers l'informatique, à créer, à simuler la croissance des arbres.
Ok, je n'ai pas entendu le nom de la personne au début.
Je vais le mettre.
So these scientists who worked in a different field with people who are basically in, how do you put it in English, in forestry, like the science of forestry or whatever. He proposed to this group of scientists that he worked with to actually he allowed them the epistemological methodological freedom as long as what they would propose would amount to a mathematical formula that amounts to basically efficient calculus, I would say, whatever is computable, right, on the basis of recursivity. As long as the mathematical formulation is computable along the lines of the logic of recursivity, whatever is proposed is acceptable. That means that there is a language there that they can share. Est-ce que j'ai bien résumé?
Yes, yes. So, in scientific interdisciplinarity, it is not necessary to converge on the object. We create spaces, different spaces, and after, with under determination, we create a new unification, not a dream of unity. It's very important when Muriel Mambrini integrated me as philosopher in her center. She said to the scientist, she will not work on your problems. She work for her work. It's a space. And with this space, we can construct step by step new relationship between the different genetics, for example. It's very important to create space and not directly a voracity on the object. If we have voracity for the object, we have a fixed paradigm, and this fixed paradigm hide as new phenomena.
We have
Tu as vu la question de Jérémy, n'est-ce pas?
Oui, juste sur la question de la politique, it's very important to distinct science and politics. It's impossible in the empiric. They are mixed. But we can make hypotheses to characterize politics, to characterize sciences, and these separation permit to construct new relationship between politics and science. Voilà, alors, Jeremy Smith. Alors,
philosophe Luca, ensemble. Luca et Jeremy, les deux.
Jeremy. Alors, the philosopher standard and the philosopher ordinaire. In the philosopher ordinaire, I insist on the order from real to empiric. Voilà, c'est tout simple. Ordinaire, the biography of the ordinary man, human, it's more exact. Ordinary man is the man who is human and subject. The subject is human, but he does not notice it. And Laruelle used this difference to explain the genocides. When we confuse human and subject, we can have genocides.
Precisely. Oui. Okay. Il y a une autre, there is another question in the chat room from Martin Rosenberg. He has translated the question in French himself. Martin, tu pourrais le poser toi-même. Dans l'esprit de l'inclusion des philosophies, Oh oui, en français, il faut en français au pluriel. Pourriez-vous, Anne, différencier les manières dont vous et Isabelle Stengers déployez le concept de l'expérimental par rapport à la nature interdisciplinaire de la pratique de l'enquête philosophique?
We have a discussion with Isabelle Stengers in a review in a journal, Nature, Science, Society. And she does not take in consideration the interdisciplinarity. It was very astonished. Isabelle Stengers make great works, but I think one problem is the authority.
But what does she believe she does in terms of the discipline? If she does not do interdisciplinarity, if it's not, is it philosophy proper, what she does? C'est ma question, toi. Si elle ne croit pas à l'interdisciplinarité comme une valeur philosophique, je ne sais pas, d'une enquête valide scientifique, je ne sais pas, mais elle rejette l'interdisciplinarité. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'elle croit qu'elle fasse? Quelle est sa discipline, la philosophie? Parce que ça ne me paraît pas comme la philosophie. Alors, c'est quoi cette discipline?
C'est à la fois la chimie et puis après la philosophie, en passant par la tour. Maintenant, elle s'intéresse à ce philosophe des années 30 qui a parlé de l'instauration philosophique. Ah, comment est-ce qu'il s'appelle? Elle s'intéresse à Whitehead. Ouais, elle a passé au fond à Whitehead, mais aussi ce philosophe français, son nom m'échappe, qui est, à mon avis, très important, qui n'est pas si inconnu que ce qu'elle dit. Ah, comment est-ce qu'il s'appelle? L'instauration philosophique. Jérémy, search on Internet, please. L'instauration philosophique. What is the author? Can you see?
Yeah, maybe I can briefly summarize what we talked about. I asked if Stengers does not believe in interdisciplinarity. Then how does she consider her own work? Is it monodisciplinary?
Yes, I did not believe in interdisciplinarity, but I transform it in genericity and the research of common equal X. Why common equal X? But if we have only common, it would be the thought of suprematist white, or it's common equal X with a noun.
Yes, we understand that is your approach. I was summarizing our conversation, and my question to you about Stengers, I was puzzled that she did not believe in interdisciplinarity. Stengers, I mean, she does not operate with the notion of genericity like Anne. So what does she think that she does in terms of disciplinarity? Because her work is evidently not monodisciplinary. It's not, philosophy in the narrow sense of the word. So Anne said that her impression is that it is a combination of chemistry, philosophy, and all under the heading of Whitehead. So my question would again be still how to do this two sciences relate to one another. It's not interdisciplinarity, then what is it? C'est quand même une rencontre de disciplines.
Yes. The idea is a nomad concept.
Ah oui.
The nomad concepts. But for me, nomad concept does not suffice. because they are not directly a relationship between disciplines. I think disciplines as separate. We have some characterization of discipline in this book. And if the relationship is indirect, we need the generic. And the generic give another interpretation of interdisciplinarity with other methodology. It is political, but we can, by hypothesis, distinct the political and the scientist. And there are political effects if in a project one discipline has not the same weight as the other. Lorsqu'on clash a discipline, there are ideologic effects and political effects.
I'll just,
it's the illiberalism in science.
If I could just say this, though, because you made me think of this, Anne-Françoise, that when you're thinking about the relationship between Stengers and your own work, it seems like Stengers has a conception of the general, and that very much is indebted to a kind of Whiteheadian sort of metaphysical generality, but she does not have a theory of the generic. I don't know.
I do not see in the work of the great work of Stengers the necessity of the generic.
Shall we move on? I think we have one more question at least. Pranav?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And
no, a bit louder, Pranav, please.
1 second.
It's okay. It's not quite audible. If you could speak up a little bit or closer.
Is this better?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I can, the question's a little complicated, but I also have it phrased out in French. So I hope that helps. So with generic epistemology, right, where we're trying to, where we're giving each discipline its own autonomy, and creating spaces for interdisciplinarity. Don't we also need something like a generic ethics or a generic politics, not necessarily for the consequences of the research, but for carrying out the research itself, right? And an ethics between scientists, right? How would a programmer and a filmmaker go about working together, right?
Yes.
And I think my question is also then, is that like in the same way that Laruelle says that a non-standard philosophy is also a non-standard epistemology, does this generic ethics or generic politics that I'm talking about in this specific sense, is that reducible to generic epistemology, or is that a separate concern?
Yes, thank you. I think the relationships of disciplines in sciences is the compatibility. When we construct models non-compatible with the general knowledge, it is a technological accident. We need compatibility. And Poincaré explains this very, very good. All this work is a work of compatibility. And for ethics, I think ethics in science is a question of orchestration between disciplines. Not compatibility, but orchestration. That disciplines has the same weight if it is technical or not technical, it is philosophical or physical, etc. So, is it an idea of Laruelle? Laruelle often said that epistemology is not a good way. Yes, and I agree on the classical epistemology. I do not critique classical epistemology. I prolonge with modelization, simulation, etc. But I think if we consider epistemology non-pertinent directly of the sciences, I think we are compatible with Laruelle. And in his philosophy, non-philosophy, non-standard philosophy, give place for all philosophies with the same weight. If they are ideologies, it is simply that we cannot consider equally in abstract the philosophies. I think Laruelle creates spaces for the other thoughts and philosophies. There is a consequence of the decomposition of phenomenology in his thesis, General Economy of Effect of Beings.
Okay.
It's extraordinary, this thesis. It's not published now, but would be published. But I read this, and it is incredible. Ricoeur said, Ricoeur was the director of thesis, and he said to Laruelle, in the beginning, you would made as Wittgenstein success, you clash. It was very difficult, but Laruelle can explain.
Anne, can you type down the name of the title of the
Étienne Souriau.
Ah, Étienne Souriau. On parle de lui, ok, d'accord.
Oui. Voilà. Stengers et Latour réédite Souriau.
Oh, je ne savais pas ça.
Merci, Jérémy.
Right. We have Devor, you have a question? Quick question.
Now we can hear you. We don't hear you.
You're muted. Or come closer to the mic. No. Maybe type down.
Yes, there are differences. Real is a radical real. Radical real, indifferent to philosophy, to science, to action of the subjects. Generic is a transformation of philosophy, of science in the world to be susceptible to construct a common equal X. Generic is Occam razor, as Feuerbach, as Badiou remarks. It's an Occam razor. And unity is when we construct a thought, for example, in tetralogos, between generic, quantic, and philosophy, we search an unity, what is not a totality. It is this radical distinction between totality and unity. So they are not in the same level. Compatibilities, because A, B, or C. Compatibilities work between sciences in the world. Compatibilities are necessary to evit accidents. The football station of Furiani was an accident because the engineer have not checked if his model was compatible with Newton's law. And if we did not make effective this compatibility, it is terrible. I think near all technological accidents have as cause the non-research of compatibilities of the hypothesis of the models and the general knowledge. And this compatibility can be reached because we can use social science, philosophy, ethics, mathematics, informatics, biology, physics, chemistry, etc.
Well, unless you have anything else to add, I would like to thank Anne-Françoise and everybody for sticking around. This was an absolutely fantastic talk and discussion. And it was really, yeah, it was a very inspiring sort of conversation. So we have another one coming tomorrow, Ray Brassier, same time, same place. Please do join us. Yeah, thank you once again, Anne-Françoise.
Thank you to you. Thank you.
Thanks.
The discussion was very lively.
Give our best to Francois.
Thank you. Katerina, I will talk with you one minute, if you will.
Ok, d'accord. Je vais rester. Ok.